Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Glick. If this is your first time joining us, each week when you tune in, you will hear one of a couple different types of shows. Sometimes when you tune in, you will hear an interview style show where we have on someone associated with the land development industry, where we talk about their origin story and then we dig into some of the projects that they've worked on over the years. And then other times when you tune in, like today, we have industry news. That's where we pull up a few different headlines and we talk about what it means for our industry. And as always on these industry news episodes, I have joining me Charles Covey. Charles, how's it going?
Hey,
So we're recording this the day after Veterans Day. So when this actually releases, though, it's going to be about a week after Veterans Day. But before we jump in, just want to say to all of you, vets who are listening in, thank you for your service. And obviously, the freedoms that we enjoy are because of you and those who have served and given the ultimate sacrifice. So just want to put that out there before we get started, because obviously it's on all of our minds currently with just everything going on around the world and everything. So with that said, we've got three articles today that we'll jump into related to a few different topics. First one is going to be related to the election that took place. So we've had some activity that has happened since the last time that we got on here and did one of these episodes. First and foremost is that President Trump was elected as back on the 5th. And so what we're going to get into with this first article is going to be related to some of the policies that he's talked about implementing. We don't know when or what the priority is of some of this stuff, but the first article comes to us from CNBC and digs into three of the top items that he has mentioned while on the campaign trail. So the headline for this article reads, "Here's what the Trump presidency could mean for the housing market, experts say." The first one is deregulation to increase affordability. So reading from the article, at the end of Trump's first presidency, he signed an executive order eliminating regulatory barriers to affordable housing, federal, state, local, and tribal opportunities. That could be a blueprint going forward, said Dennis Shea, executive director of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Terwilliger Center. So continuing on here, during his 2024 campaign, Trump called for slashing regulations and permit requirements, which can add onto housing costs for home buyers. Experts say that regulatory costs trickle down to the prices home buyers face. Quote, we will eliminate regulations that drive up housing costs with the goal of cutting the cost of a new home in half, Trump said in a speech at the Economic Club of New York on September 5th. About 24% of the cost of a single family home and about 41% of the cost of a multifamily home are directly attributable to regulatory costs at the local, state, and federal level, Tobin said. So the second one here is related to impacts on construction workforce. So Trump has also blamed rising home prices on a surge of illegal immigration during the Biden administration. However, experts say that most undocumented immigrants are not homeowners. Instead, they live in homes owned by U.S. citizens, Channel said. If a mass deportation were to happen, such homes would remain occupied, he added. Yet proposals like mass deportations and tighter border control could impact housing affordability, Tobin said. About a third, or 31% of construction workers in the U.S. were immigrants, according to the National Association of Home Builders. Anything that threatens to disrupt the flow of immigrant labor will send shockwaves to the labor market in home construction, Tobin said. It's been difficult to recruit native-born workers into the construction industry, experts say. According to a 2017 National Association of Home Builders survey, construction trades are an unpopular career choice for young American adults. Only 3% showed interest in the field per the poll. However, obviously that poll is from 2017, so things have changed. I feel like since that time, there's been a lot more programs put in place to help more people get involved in the trades. And then a couple stats that I went out there and found. These aren't from the article. I found them from a few different sources, and these are nationwide data points. But what I was interested in related to that, this whole talk about deporting illegal immigrants in the country was, well, what percentage of the total labor force are immigrants, which was said in the National Association of Home Builders article of 31%. And then what percentage of those are here illegally? And from what I found, it's 1 to 2 million of the 3 million immigrants are here illegally. So that's a significant number. of the workforce in total. And I know we're going to talk about here in a second how this is going to differ by area of the country as well, right? So in Texas, it might be different than other areas of the country. So let's read real quick from the third item that was talked about in this article, and then we'll go ahead and react to each of these. So the third one is related to tariffs. So tariffs could hike building costs. Trump has proposed a 10% to 20% tariff on all imports across the board, as well as a rate between 60 and 100% for goods from China. A blanket tariff at 10 to 20% on raw building materials like lumber could push housing costs higher, as well as materials for home renovations, experts say. Any tariffs that raise the cost of the products are going to flow directly to the consumer, Tobin said. On average, construction costs for single-family homes is around $392,000, according to a data analysis by Resi Club, a housing and real estate data newsletter. It depends on what the tariffs look like, said Daryl Fairweather, chief economist at Redfin. There could be varying impacts. And the last one here, overall, home builders expect to construct about 1.2 million new single-family homes and around 300,000 multifamily units over the next year, Tobin said. We're not quite building back up to the pace we need, but it'll be higher, he said. It'll be higher than this year. So that was a lot to read from this article. So I want to get your take on this, Charles. There's obviously three different things we talked about here. The first one being the deregulation, and then kind of going into the labor force, and then last the tariffs.
Yeah, we've got three separate concepts to kind of dive into here. Almost three different articles, really, because they're so different. The deregulation, you and I talk about this a lot, and those numbers are right. It's a huge percentage of the cost of a home that goes into all the red tape you got to get through to get there. The challenge here is that it's not as simple as just making a few statements about, oh yeah, we're going to open up federal lands and you can build on them and that solves the housing problem. And that's not how this goes. How much federal land within reasonable driving distance of downtown Dallas is available to do this? I mean, limited, very limited. If we need to go build in, the Western United States on federal lands, yeah, there's like a bazillion acres out there, but it's not practically applicable to this problem, unfortunately. Now, there may be some other things. If they downsize government the way that they say they can by half or 2/3, okay, now we've got government buildings that maybe just are sitting empty. Great. Okay, now that's maybe land that we can repurpose. That's a long-term thing, though. That doesn't happen immediately. So I'm really curious to see how that plays out, because now we've got potentially all of these edifices of big government that now no longer need occupancy because those organizations have been downsized or have gone away. That might be an opportunity. It's tough, though, to regulate this whole entitlement process and all the red tape. It's supposed to be a state and local thing. It's not supposed to be a national government thing. And the Constitution is pretty clear on those things being state regulated. So maybe there's pressure they can apply to the states, but ultimately they can't create overarching things that, then just make bigger government. That's what they're trying to avoid here. So I think again, I've said this many, many times, a housing czar to work with every governor and help move things forward in a collaborative manner rather than just a bunch of 50 states doing 50 things. Somebody to spearhead that, I think, would be massive, and hopefully that's something they come up with. But again, a lot to be seen here. I don't know that just a few statements are going to have a lot of impact, so we'll see how that plays out. The construction workforce, that's monstrous, right? There's a lot of ways that this could go poorly, but let's think about that. Are they going to do a mass deportation that shuts down the ability to build stuff? Absolutely, that is not the intent, right? The intent is for people that shouldn't be here, that are detrimental to our society, to go back where they came from, or at least not be here, right? What's the standard saying they would say in college when the bar's closing?
Oh,
it's 2 a.m.
Yeah.
You don't got to go home, but you can't stay here.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the scenario. You got to go somewhere else, guys. I don't know if you're going to Canada or you're going to Mexico or you're going to some other country, but you can't be here if you're doing the shit that you're doing. And some of them need to go somewhere else, right? There's criminals here that shouldn't be here. So that's the real intent, is to get these people gone. They don't have the intent of destroying what is a very productive and a very important construction workforce. So there's going to be efforts made to protect that, because that's part of what allows us to even be even close on getting homes to affordability. If we lose our workforce, now costs continue to climb, and that is not what they're trying to do. So I don't think that we're going to see a massive issue unless it's mishandled and they start doing deportations and the workforce thinks, oh crap, they're coming after me because it's not communicated well, and then they scatter. And that's not a scenario that we want. But I think good communication and a well-run program, this can be totally fine. The bad guys can go away. We can kick them out and keep the people who are being productive members of society and help them become official productive members of society. I think that is the intent, is overarching immigration programs they have to be better than what we have now, because it's so laborious. I mean, guys that I know that have been here for many, many years, very productive members, love to work hard, love to contribute, love to do good things for people. And it's very difficult for them to get their paperwork in order. And it's just such a slow process. It takes many, many years. So getting that streamlined, I think, is really something that needs to happen. And if they're going to do all of the efficiencies in government that they're talking about, that should be possible. We've got some of the best minds tackling some of these things. Now, if you go to the next one, I'm sorry, go back to the construction workers, because this to me is pretty interesting. That 31% immigrant workers, I don't know if you've ever been to a job site in Texas, but it's a way more than 30%. So that one I thought was funny. In certain trades, especially, way more than 30%. I don't know if you've ever been to a job site at 4 a.m. when they're pouring concrete. There's not too many white guys out there.
Yeah.
So, we need this workforce, and they're phenomenal at what they do. So I think that every effort will be made to keep the right people here. Now, that number, that 31% number, that was funny to me. So I think in some parts of the country maybe it's lower, but at least in the South, much higher. The tariffs, I think, are, of all of these, they're the one that concerns me the most. Not concerns me that it's going to be a problem, but just concerns me in just there's unknowns for how that'll be enacted and how that'll play out. The idea here is that tariffs do make things cost more. It's inevitable, right? You're keeping stuff from other countries out. You're making it be produced here, and that will increase the cost of that thing. But that's okay because you're paying less taxes. So that's got to be the give and take. So yeah, maybe home values don't drop. Maybe they even go up a little bit because it costs more to produce it domestically. But we're producing it domestically, which is good. And because of the tariffs, now we can take taxes down, which should make these things a wash or even a net positive to the American. So that's the element here. The tariffs almost certainly will make things cost more money, but the offset should be in your taxable amount should be lower. And that should be, if it's done right, you should end up with a net positive to the American. So hopefully that plays out. And we're in the near term, that's the challenge, is that you're going to see some tariffs come before you see the result in lower taxes. And that's where it gets things in a pinch, and on a project specific basis or in a 12 to 24 month time frame, that could be a little more challenging. Long term, though, I think this probably shakes itself out and works really nicely. We're going to pull a lot of things, pull production back to the U.S. and get that stuff back on domestic soil. I think that's a great thing for Americans. And in many ways, that's, we've allowed too much to get offshore and too much to go to China and too much to go other places. So I think if you ask Trump, China is the key thing here, and to try to stop giving them so much of our money. The challenge is China, especially India, some of the developing countries, they can make things cheaper than we can, dramatically cheaper than we can. And that's where it gets tricky, because some of those things are high volume and important to be made cheaper. It just doesn't make sense for us to do them here. And that's where I don't know how this shakes out. Do they subsidize some of those things? Like, I don't know exactly how that will work out. I mean, you think about stuff that we use in building, like toilets, for example, they can make them in China and Mexico a lot cheaper than we can make them here. And maybe we should still continue to do that and not make them all here. So it's going to be interesting how those things shake out. I think that there are deals, through NAFTA with our northern and southern neighbors. I think especially Mexico is in a really good position to be lower tariff than other competitors, which means Mexican products will probably be very, very competitive compared to stuff coming out of Asia. So I think that's probably a good thing. That keeps things a little bit closer to home. There's some stuff talking about lumber. There definitely is lumber that comes out of South America, some rainforest stuff. But as far as what we're using in our homes, in structural construction, most of that is coming from the U.S. Most of that is yellow pine coming from the U.S. and at least what we use here in Texas, and that's we've got plenty of that. So there's a sawmill constraint in some cases, but there's not a lumber constraint. We've got plenty of pine trees growing, and so we should be fine there. I think that's probably going to be okay on the lumber side. I'm looking at the list here. What else was there, Ryan, that would be concerning?
That was it. So those are the three things that were brought up in this particular article.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we'll see how it all shakes out and what's implemented. I mean, we're still a couple months away from the inauguration, and then 2.5 months away from taking office. But you already start to see certain pieces getting put into place so that this next administration can hit the ground running versus getting into office and then trying to figure things out after the fact. So you're definitely very publicly seeing all the choices for different positions. And I think prior to recording this, one of the big ones was the border czar, and a lot of the conversations that's been happening around that, which I think has some people panicking of what's going to happen with deportations and things of that nature. So it felt like a very timely article and a timely conversation.
I think that the key element to keep in mind is that the administration wants growth and they want the American public to be successful. And so extreme actions on any of these topics don't really help that. And so I don't think we're going to see extreme actions that are detrimental to our economy.
Yep. Agree. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next article. So something else that happened last week was right after the election, the 2 days following was the Fed meeting in November, and there was another rate cut. So let's go ahead and read this article that comes to us from the National Association of Home Builders. The headline reads, Fed cuts rates amid uncertain economic outlook. The Fed cut the short-term federal funds rate by an additional 25 basis points at the conclusion of its November meeting, reducing the top target rate to 4.75%. However, while the Fed noted it is making progress toward its 2% inflation target, it did not provide post-election guidance on the pace and ultimate path for future interest rate cuts. The bond market is not waiting, and the 10-year Treasury rate rising from 3.6% in mid-September to close to 4.3% due to changing growth and government deficit expectations. Thursday's statement from the Fed noted, recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace. Since earlier in the year, labor market conditions have generally eased and the unemployment rate has moved up, but remains low. Inflation has made progress toward the committee's 2% objective, but remains somewhat elevated. The committee seeks to achieve maximum employment and inflation at the rate of 2% over the longer run. The committee judges that the risks to achieving its employment and inflation goals are roughly in balance. The economic outlook is uncertain, and the committee is attentive to the risks to both sides of its dual mandate. All things considered, with inflation having moved lower, there is clearly policy room for future rate reductions as the Fed normalizes monetary policy. A further cut to the federal funds rate in December to a 4.5% top rate seems likely. After that, given expected changes for fiscal policy and fiscal policy impacts, the Fed is likely to slow its pace of rate cuts, perhaps moving to 125 basis point cut per quarter in 2025 to the ultimate terminal rate. As noted earlier, the level of this terminal rate is likely to be reevaluated in the coming months. So I think this is what we've been talking about for a while, that there was always an expectation that there'd be a quarter point and then another quarter point. So they did do the one here in November, and I guess time will tell whether they do another one again in December.
Yeah, we want the soft landing, right? We've talked about this. It's never happened before. Will they pull it off? In order to have a shot at that, they've got to be as proactive as possible, considering the slow nature of the reporting. And they're clearly seeing employment numbers are not great, and the inflation numbers are stabilizing in that 2%-ish range. So they've got to do a cut. They've got to do another cut in December. It's not actually a good thing right? So in some ways, we're like, yeah, the guys that are like me that are financing big projects is like, okay, that's great because that affects us, down the line with our construction financing. Every quarter point is meaningful. But if the economy was booming, they wouldn't have to do this. So that's just something to think about, like, because I'm torn here because it's like, okay, I'm excited because it helps our projects, it saves money over the long run, but at the same time, it means that things are slowing down. So generally speaking, though, following an election, a lot of things pick up. 9 out of the last 11 elections, we've seen mortgage rates drop and new home sales increase in the first 2 quarters after the inauguration. So I think we'll probably see that happen. I think this probably helps that happen. We've got some pent up demand on that side just because of what the rates have been. So let's see how this plays out. But I think generally this is a good thing for the economy and could, in theory, kickstart the next 4 years of what could be a pretty good period for all of us.
Yep. So we will see in our coming episodes what happens with the rate cut and follow along with this. But let's go ahead and get to our last article here. So this one's a little bit different. This one comes to us from Fox Business. I thought because, when we're recording this, like I said at the outset, we're right around Veterans Day, that came across an article that was related to an organization from Gary Sinise, where they build homes for veterans. So the headline for this article reads, Actor Gary Sinise's foundation builds home for veterans. Award-winning actor Gary Sinise discusses his foundation's efforts in building homes for veterans and reflects on his late son's legacy. So this is actually a video that comes to us from Fox Business. So we're going to go ahead and play this video. And then from there, we'll react and close out this episode. So let's go ahead and play it now.
On this Veterans Day, Gary Sinise is presenting a brand new mortgage-free smart home to one of our nation's most wounded heroes. He joins us now. And I got to tell you, Gary, I'm the father of a vet. There's a lot of vets who you don't necessarily touch personally, but who are so grateful for the work that you do. So thank you for devoting your life to the veterans cause. It's such a noble cause, I got to tell you. There's one veteran in particular, a guy named Joshua Hargis. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Tell us a little about him, because he's a guy who got a house through your foundation.
Well, thanks for having me, David. Yeah, I'm actually here at Joshua's house right now. We just gave him a tour. Him and his family saw the house for the first time. This is part of our RISE program at the Gary Sinise Foundation. It stands for Restoring Independence, Supporting Empowerment. And I had the pleasure, I live in outside of Nashville, and this home is built in Nolensville, Tennessee. So great pleasure to come over here this morning and walk the house and the property with Joshua and his family. Josh, U.S. Army Ranger, he was injured in 2013. Suicide bombing and IEDs and all of that. He lost 4 teammates. He was a canine handler. His dog Yanni was unfortunately lost at the same time. He's given a lot for his country. He was injured, lost 2 legs. So his family has been going through a lot, and these families can struggle with the housing that they have, and we want to try to provide them an opportunity to have a mortgage-free, stressless life by not having to worry about the mortgage and where they're going to live and getting around in the wheelchair and all that. So these houses are specifically designed for them. And here we are on Veterans Day. I get to present what is our 94th home.
Wow.
To a great American, Joshua Hargis.
You know, there are a lot of different ways you can suffer from war. The physical injuries are the most obvious, but there are internal injuries by folks who come home who get so depressed about the fact that they survived and a lot of their buddies didn't survive. And sometimes you can be perfectly physically okay, but have this depression that results in the worst occasion in suicide. And the numbers are staggering, Gary. The VA estimates that 8,000 veterans commit suicide every year. Of course, there are drug problems and other things that get involved, but how do we approach those problems, the problems of those who are fortunate enough to go through war without a physical injury but are suffering terribly from emotional distress?
It can be a very, very difficult challenge because sometimes there are no signs. I mean, you've heard all the stories where the buddies and the family say, I had no idea what he was going through, never showed any sign, and then the next thing you know, they've taken their own lives. So it's a very, very difficult, challenging problem. We have several programs at the Gary Sinise Foundation, mental wellness programs, healing retreats, and all kinds of things that we're doing to support trying to attack this problem, be proactive with it. But it really is up to battle buddies to recognize the sign.
Absolutely.
As much as I can to point the struggling service member toward healing programs like we have at the Gary Sinise Foundation.
Gary, earlier this year, you lost a very important part of your foundation and a part of your life, of course, your son, Max Sinise. Does the loss of him, he died tragically of cancer at a much too young age, but he was a part of the foundation. Does his loss mean more to your foundation as a part of your life?
Well, it's a very, very difficult thing. I've spent multiple years trying to help the families of our fallen heroes and families that have lost loved ones, parents who have lost a child, spouses who've lost a husband, children who have lost a father or mother. That can be very, very difficult. And now we find ourselves kind of in the same spot, having lost our son. He was very, very dedicated. Those are pictures of him. They're very dedicated to the Gary Sinise Foundation. He was also a musician, great composer, and we've just today we're releasing an album of music. It's on GarySiniseFoundation.org. It's an album that Mac did a record right before he died called Resurrection and Revival. And now today we're putting out part 2 of Resurrection and Revival. The story is there on the website. All the proceeds from the vinyl sales of the record go to the Gary Sinise Foundation. Mac was very dedicated to the foundation. He would have been one of our young leaders had he not had to face this cancer fight. We miss him so much, and we're very grateful for all the support that we've received and the people that are actually buying the record and helping the Gary Sinise Foundation out.
Well, God bless Mac's immortal soul, and God bless the work that you do, Gary. It means so much to so many people. Thank you for being here.
I sure appreciate it, David. Thanks for having me.
Yep.
So a couple things I wanted to add. The reason I pulled that up is I thought I like to shed light on that topic. And also, I mean, I know there's many organizations like this out there that are helping veterans, especially with housing. But one other thing here I wanted to point out before we wrap up is basically some statistics around the number of veterans who are homeless. And so I went out and grabbed the numbers for this, and there's around 20,000 veterans experienced sheltered homelessness, which is an increase of 502 veterans or 2.6% from 2022. And then 15,500 experienced unsheltered homelessness, an increase of 1,900 veterans or 14.3% from 2022. And unsheltered veterans represent nearly 80% of the overall increase. So it's something that I think is important for us to keep in mind on around Veterans Day. I know Veterans Day is one day a year, but this continues to be a problem in our country. And so just shedding light on organizations that are doing something to help with some of these problems, I think is important.
Yeah, I love that. I love what Gary does. And he's just such a great face for this problem and also providing solutions. Those numbers are big. We're talking about 35,000 homeless veterans, whether sheltered or unsheltered. That's hard to even conceptualize. So that's embarrassing. And I think that there are some people coming into place now with the new administration that could have some positive impact on that. So I'll definitely hope and pray that they do. But this is a big issue.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, with that said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up for this episode. We'll come back again in a couple weeks, talk about any new transformations that have happened in the market and in the industry and everything. Any final words you have, Charles, before we call the show?
Well, we've been saying long time coming. It's a big time. We've got one hurdle that's been jumped here by getting what we think is a pro-business and pro-development and pro-home building and pro-American administration. So that's one hurdle. We've got some more things to tackle, but I think there's some people in place now that can do that. So again, a very important time, very critical time for us in this country. I'm excited for the things that are happening and the way it's going now. the election was fascinating to see it play out. So glad to be a part of it. It's fun.
Well said. All right, guys. Well, that is all for this episode. You can find all the links and everything we covered in the show notes down in the description below, and we will talk to you next week.